There's a beer so rare, so beautiful, that its very name makes beer geeks flush with excitement. It's made at a Trappist monastery in the flat nowheres of Belgium that has been brewing for over 150 years. At an ungodly 10.2% ABV, it's a huge, complex quadruple style beer with notes of figs, caramel and licorice. You serve it in a chalice, you age it like fine wine, and you can only get it from the monastery itself. Which is why when it was voted best beer in the world in 2005, it caused traffic jams that required police intervention. Everyone wanted to taste what had suddenly become the world's rarest beer. The thing is, it's not the best beer in the world. It's not even the best beer that Westvleteren make. Sure, the 12 is a world-class quadruple. It's possibly the benchmark and even maybe the original, as I've written about in many articles about the beer. But I, and many other beer geeks, actually prefer the 8% double. And what's more is, while there are lots of great quads just like Westvleteren 12, St Bernardus obviously because they used to brew it, but also Rochefort 10, Strafford Quad, there's no double quite like the Westvleteren. It's somehow darker, hoppier, fruitier and more drinkable. It's a completely unique beer that makes a mockery of the BJCP guidelines for this style. So full disclosure, when I sat down to think about this Christmas homebrew episode, I wanted to brew something traditional, warming, Belgian, classic. And obviously I thought about Westvleteren 12, not just for the clicks, but also for matching with mince pies. But then I remembered, as you always have to as a homebrewer, that I'm going to need to drink about 19 litres of this. And not only is the double less boozy, for me, it's also a better beer. Now, details from the monks on the 12 is almost non-existent, and it's even worse for the 8 because, well, not many people ask. So it's going to take some forensic investigation to work out how to brew this beer. Since I can't get hold of a bottle anytime soon, let's start with the last time that I tried it with Brad during our Trappist beer episode on Westvleteren. So this is their dark kind of double style beer, maybe a little bit darker than most doubles, a little bit closer to a sort of Belgian stout.
Yeah, that is very dark, isn't it? Very ruby.
And there's more banana, loads of kind of raisiny, sweet, dark datiness.
It's very rich, Johnny.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a little hint of pear and nail polish, but also bitterness, like roasted bitterness, not hot bitterness. Or maybe a little bit of hot bitterness. A definite kind of assertive, slightly roasted, slightly hoppy finish to it that you wouldn't get, say, in Westmalle Double, which has the same use, similar ingredients, but none of that big finish on it.
It's a really complex beer, isn't it, Johnny?
Yeah.
I imagine it would just, it's quite cold at the moment, but I imagine it would open up as it kind of warms up.
Yeah, right. So we have a ruby, maybe even black beer in the glass, but the head is not that kind of rich brown imperial stout colour. We have some roasted character, but also lots of midtones like raisin, figs, dates, but then a really decent hoppy finish, completely not to style really. So it's got to be complex and fruity with no real booziness, but also hoppy, but incredibly drinkable. Taste sweet, but be dry. I'm gonna have to dig a little deeper. When I'm looking to brew a clone, the first place I look is the original source, or as close as I can get. So I either contact the brewer, check my usual homebrew bibles, or dig into the history books. Only the latter really worked here, as I found a loose recipe in the seminal Brew Like a Monk by Stan Hieronymus and managed to top that information up with some more historical narrative style books. With the clone, my next step is to go to the forums of the various homebrew websites to see what success homebrewers have had and what recipes they're coming up with. Which is when I got really confused. So it's mid-October, which is essentially the time when I wanted to be brewing, but I cannot nail this recipe down. I've been spending every second I have spare in the studio over the last couple of weeks, trawling through things like this brewing Bible, if you'll excuse the pun, Brew Like a Monk by Stan Hieronymus, through the more historical stuff like this one from Jeff Vandenstein, which I've used for so much of our content in our Trappist series, to try and come up with a recipe. And the issue I've had is that A, Belgians love to add mystique to their brewing, whether they're monks or just lay people. They love to talk about traditions and quirks and this kind of stuff and not really tell you the exact details. But B, where I have got the exact details, and both of these do have, like this one literally tells me how much sugar per litre to add. When I look at the homebrew recipes for clones of Westvleteren 8, I get completely different information, which either implies they haven't done the research here, or they have done this, tried it, and completely failed and gone, well, I'm going to have to make it more complicated. Because while this calls for simplicity and this calls for simplicity, 2 malts, 2 hops, 1 yeast, and then a fairly complicated process of brewing, all the homebrew ones have 7 or 8 malts, between 1 and 5 hops, different boil lengths, different fermentation temperatures, different lagering lengths, different colours at the end, different ABVs at the end, different FGs. It's absolutely impossible to tell whether anybody's had any success at home, essentially. So, in the privileged position that I am, I have gone to an expert. I've gone to Stan Hieronymus himself. And on emailing him, he sent me a lecture that he does quite frequently to homebrewers called Keep It Simple. So that's a good sign, and hopefully he's going to explain to me exactly how Westvleteren make their beers and exactly why, when it's done on a homebrew scale, people do it differently. Because I really want to brew a faithful version, right down to the open fermentation of the beer. But I don't want to do that if I'm unable to replicate that and other people know that and I need to add malts or other things to it to get that. So I'm hoping that Stan's going to say, don't worry about it. You know, these people, they're not bold enough. Go for it. But I suspect he's going to be more pragmatic. So, Stan, thank you for joining me on this slightly mad trip that I thought was going to be relatively simple and quickly spiraled out of control. The thing that got me to get in touch with you specifically was a kind of a contradiction that I keep finding in all of the talking about these recipes, and even within your wonderful book, which is, you know, whenever you talk to the monks, it's always about simplicity. So particularly at Westvleteren, it's, you know, 2 malts, 2 hops, 2 sugars, almost specific days of time in tank as well, and all of this kind of thing. And then you look at the recipes later in your book from the American breweries, or you go online and look, and there's 7, 8, 9 different kinds of malt in there.
I think there are 2 parts. At a commercial brewery, using that many grains is not necessarily practical. If you are, in this case, they make 3 beers total. You know, you're going through, this is going to be their production. Their production is not massive. So it's even more important, say, at Westmall, which makes a lot more beers. So that simplicity is there. The magic is that, as simple as it is, they get incredibly complex flavor. And certainly the yeast plays, the yeast and their willingness to accept yeast as a partner and say, what do you need? I will provide it for you. The yeast does not work for the brewer. The brewer is a partner with the yeast.
I think in the recipe you provide in here, and also in the Jeff Van der Steen, they talk about it free rising to sort of 28-ish after about 80% of drinking. So that's a key way of building in some complexity if I'm only going to use 2 malts, 2 sugars.
So the yeast provider is generally going to look at things very safe. They don't want you to screw up your beer. So they'll say, only let it go to this temperature. And then you're shocked when you realize at what temperatures some of these breweries allow their beers to finish at. You do that too early in the process, you end up with all kinds of off flavors. So letting the temperature get higher once you're probably 80% of the way towards your target attenuation, then that creates those flavors on top of it.
While we're talking about temperature, there seems to be quite a few indications of using a step mash. Is that something that you'd recommend for these?
I would not. I mean, it's okay, and that is what most of the monastery breweries do. But at home, a single mash for attenuation at a shockingly low temperature. So you go, it's, you know, how is this going to work out? And that same thing is true at, small breweries. Shortly after the book came out, the Great American Beer Festival started their Pro-Am competition. I did that with a local brewery, and he's going, never mash this low before. So you're mashing for attenuation. You're looking for beer that is dry, but you can't judge it strictly on your degree of attenuation or where you finish at, and having to do with your choice of malts, obviously. What you're really looking for is what the Belgians call digestibility.
This may seem like a mad question, and I've asked lager producers as well when I've made lagers and talked about open fermentation. As far as I understand it, there's not a lot of point of attempting that, on the scale I'll be doing here of, 24, 25 litres, just having the lid off, is there?
Westvleteren has modernized certain parts, and certainly its bottling line. But again, it's kept the open fermentation, which I do think adds complexity, and you don't have that in the other monastery breweries. You can put the lid on loosely, you'll accomplish the same thing as with the open fermentation. You don't need to fill it up all the way. You probably don't want to, because you want a blowing off your foam.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen in the blowing off foam, which is not things I didn't put in the book. And certainly an important part of these beers is also the foam, which means during the process of fermentation, you need to have a certain amount of blow off, because you're blowing away those fatty lipids, which are then going to inhibit your foam if they end up in the beer itself. That's sort of a side thing. So you can start with the open fermentation, and then you can transfer into a carboy,
Right.
maybe to finish the last part if you want, or for the lagering process, which I think is very important in these beers. And that is, once you are at the gravity you want to be, then a very long, cold lagering is super important. So basically 0,
Right.
or 2 or 3, and for as long a period as you want, which means you are also going to need to re-yeast and sugar at the time for secondary fermentation in the bottle.
So the message from Stan was pretty clear to me. You can be traditional in your methods if you have the equipment and the gumption, but getting the level of complexity that Westvleteren does won't be easy without using additional malts, because they've been dialing it in over decades. But this is a clone. You don't clone a beer by immediately throwing out what you think is the original recipe. So here it is, my best guess at Westvleteren's brew sheet. Pils and pale malt from Belgium, dark and light sugar, German and Slovenian hops, Westmalle yeast, step mash, extended boil, warm open ferment, long lagering, and long bottle conditioning. This recipe really doesn't feel like it's going to end up, for me, where it does for them. But that's the fun. Hey Beer Geeks, now before we dig into the actual brew day, I just wanted to explain why we haven't been doing much homebrew content lately. Now the way that we do homebrew content, which is with, it's long form, there's rich narrative, there's deep technical research, and then of course we release the video and the recipe via the malt miller at no kickback to us, means that our homebrew content takes a long time to put together, a lot of effort, and indeed a lot of money. And at the moment we don't have a sponsor to support that. So the best thing that you can do if you love our homebrew content is join our Patreon forum. It starts at just £2 a month, and not only does that support the homebrew content that we do and get your name at the end of every video, it also gives you access to our Discord forum, in which we have a smaller forum, a homebrew forum, which is one of the best places on the internet. I use it all the time for research, for inspiration, for technical advice, and just for feedback on what I'm doing. It's a really friendly, really safe and really educational place, and I cannot recommend it enough. And you can get access to that from just £2 a month and support everything that we do. Back to the video. Okay, so it's brew day, and as you know, I've done quite a lot of prep for this recipe, including speaking to some of the biggest brewing experts in the world. And obviously the recipe is pretty simple. 2 grains, 2 sugars, 3 mash steps. I've got my starter yeast ticking away nicely over here with the Westvleteren yeast. And also the fact that Grainfather automates everything makes the step mashing and lots of other bits really, really easy. And to be honest, if you don't have that automation, I wouldn't really bother with the step mash, but I'm hoping it will give me a little bit of extra fermentability out of my grain. And it'll also potentially increase the amount of phenols, I should say, sort of cloviness that will come out of the beer as well with that ferulic acid rest. But that is not critical. I'm only doing it because I have swanky equipment. Talking of swanky equipment, the biggest dilemma I had this morning was whether to put this on. A, because it's way too small for me, but B, because it's October when I'm brewing. So this is my only admission of the fact that this is Christmas content. But I've reached my strike temperature. I've been dilly-dallying too long brewing other things. Careful with that. So yeah, let's get mashed in. So in terms of the grains that I've chosen, I've gone for, as you can see here, all Dingerman. So all of this is Belgian malt that I'm using. So I am sticking faithful to the monks. As you can see, it is already really milky in there, like we had when we were doing our decoction in our brew with Utopian. So this is below the temperature at which it would really emulsify and go into suspension. So it's going to look a little bit milky for this first rest. Right, mashed in. Captain America lid on. Another coffee, I reckon.
That's all for this episode, so join me next week as I eat all the candy sugar,
What?
tear out what little hair I have left about the colour of the beer,
When you've set out to make a clone, is deeply, deeply upsetting.
and get on my hands and knees for a serious cleaning up job.